Melissa's diary. Ronnie's been hurt. They say he's been shot, but I can't get anyone to tell me how bad or anything. I'm going to start screaming and scratching some people's eyes out if they don't tell me. I didn't know it, but Ron put me and Cal, as well as that Karen person I bet, down as next of kin to be notified if he died or got hurt or something like that. With no family, beyond a couple of second cousins, his only sister died in a car wreck a few years back. I guess Ron thought it was a natural thing to do. When he gets home, I'm going to hug and kiss him for thinking of us that way, and then I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about going places where they shoot at you and stuff. Sherry took it well, darn her. I couldn't believe how cool she was about it. Heck, she was a basket case when she found out he was going to that country. Now she was calmly reassuring me and saying he was going to be all right. It was more of that drivel about how he was going to come home someday and nothing was going to prevent it. It was only a matter of time. She told me the other day. I hope she's right. He hasn't seen my 2 young children either. They were born after he left to go to Denver, and I want them to know him. Oh God, I hope he's okay. I woke up in an army-run hospital in a compound on the outskirts of Kabul. My head hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt in my life. When I tried to move, a fiery pain lanced through my shoulder. My vision contracted to a narrow tunnel of blackness before slowly receding. Holding my body still, I lifted my head an excruciating inch or so off the pillow and tried to look around. My right arm had a big needle sticking in the primary artery. A plastic tube led from there to a bottle of what was clearly blood hanging on a pole next to my bed. There were some other liter-sized bottles up there too, but I didn't know what they were. On my left side, by craning my neck painfully around, I could see my shoulder was hidden by a mass of bandages. Experimenting with a tiny movement of my fingers, I confirmed whatever lay under the dressing was the source of the agony that had almost made me pass out. A middle-aged woman in hospital surgical greens came in a door I hadn't noticed. She took one look at me and backed out of the room to call a summons down what I took to be a long hallway. In a moment, a man and another woman joined the first woman, and they all arranged themselves beside the bed that I was just now figuring out I was in. "How are you feeling?" the guy asked in a gruff voice. I could see the big silver eagles on the light green shirt under his white coat. I guessed he was a doctor. "Shoulder hurts bad," I croaked. I'd had to swallow hard a couple of times just to manage that. I massaged my throat and pantomimed drinking something. The doctor nodded and motioned to the first woman I'd seen to pour me a glass full of water from a steel pitcher. She put a straw in it and held it to my mouth so I could drink thirstily. "Thank you," I told her. My voice was still hoarse and faint, but it had improved 100% from my first attempt. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. "Where am I?" I asked, glancing at each of the trio of medical personnel. "Kabul," the doctor said bluntly. He started pointing one of those little flashlights in each eye, flicking it away, and then back. Finally, he grunted and put the darn thing away. "What's your name?" he said suddenly, surprising me. "Ronald Terrence Masters," I shot back. "What's yours?" He was beginning to irritate me. "Dr. Evans," he said shortly, but he had a faint grin on his face as he said it. "You remember what happened to you?" he asked in a more amiable voice. I nodded slowly, careful to not move my shoulder. "We were ambushed by some Taliban guerrillas," I said slowly. "There was one bomber, and then a bunch of them attacking from out of a draw behind us and some old guy with a pistol. I waited, but there was nothing else. I can't remember anything past that," I complained. The colonel/doctor nodded. Curiously, he seemed very satisfied about something. "From what they tell me," he said conversationally, "you smacked into something hard and got knocked out. But it looks like that's going to be okay. The skull doesn't appear to have been fractured, and it doesn't look like you suffered more than a light concussion. You don't seem to have any loss of memory, and your pupils are equal and reactive, so I think the head injury is the least of your worries." I accepted what he said. I sure didn't feel any different than I had before the firefight, well, except for that headache, that is. It was fading a little. The intensity was already noticeably lessening. "And I don't think your shoulder wound is going to be a big deal either," he said confidently. It was easy for him to say that. It wasn't his shoulder. I bet his wasn't hurting even the tiniest little bit. I grunted when I tried to move. The younger of the two, what I took to be nurses, wiped away the sweat that had suddenly popped out on my forehead. "We can give you something for the pain," the doctor said. He made a couple of entries on some papers on a clipboard at the end of my bed. He turned and left, taking the older woman with him. He was talking a mile a minute to her, using words I didn't understand and quickly lost interest in. The young nurse, a first lieutenant, stayed behind to bathe my face with cool water. When I asked, she let me use the bed controls to slowly raise my chest and head higher. I've hated to lay flat on my back since I was a boy and felt a lot better reclining instead. When the matronly older woman came back, she put a needle into some gadget on the tube they had stuck in my right forearm, and a few minutes later, the level of pain dropped away fast. It also put me back to sleep. 2 weeks later, I was ambulatory in the jargon the Army medical folks use and more than a little restless. The shoulder was healing well, and they already had me doing some really light, slow movements to make sure the knitting muscles would be flexible when they mended. I found a computer terminal they would let me use. I was able to access my Yahoo account and got off some emails to Karen and Melissa letting them know I was okay. My inbox was full of anxious inquiries from both of the women in my life, Karen and Melissa, and, surprisingly, from a lot of folks back at corporate headquarters. I emailed my boss and my secretary back in Denver and asked them to spread the word that I was fine and getting better fast. I said to tell everyone that I only could use my right arm for now, and typing with one hand was really slow. I'd answer all the emails as I could, but it would be a while. The guys from the Marine platoon came by yesterday. They'd been rotated back to a base camp for some R&R before going back out on another assignment. I had no idea what was going on when the young nurse rolled me in my wheelchair. I didn't need it, didn't want it, but it was regulations, she said. Into the hospital day room. A few minutes later, the double outside doors crashed open and the whole Marine platoon, all 46 of them, marched inside. They halted, forming a double rank around 3 sides of the room, did a facing movement into the center toward me, and stood at attention. The lieutenant commanding them marched up to a point 3 paces in front of me and saluted. I learned a bit later the 2 officers flanking him were his company and battalion commanders. The nurse helped me stand up. I felt foolish in my faded blue hospital pajamas and ratty old robe, but no one paid any attention. The lieutenant brought everyone to attention and then shouted a command to give me a hand salute, though I guessed it wasn't strictly kosher. Military personnel don't salute civilians, but they did it anyway. After putting his men at parade rest, the lieutenant read a thoroughly unofficial award citation off a piece of paper that looked kind of like parchment. Then they presented me with a large, circular hunk of metal from the base of an artillery shell and burnished to a soft brown color. It was, the citation said, to stand in lieu of a Bronze Star for bravery in the incident occurring at kilometer 137, etc., etc. The thing said my quick reaction, as opposed my memories of a panicked one, saved the lives of many Marines and civilian contractor personnel. My face was scarlet by now, and I was so choked up I couldn't talk. Finally, I got out a shaky voice thanks to the officers and men. I asked if I could shake the hand of everyone in the platoon, and I positioned myself at the door. As they filed out, I shook every single hand and then followed them outside to mingle with them for the last time. The next morning, I was on a military med evac flight that went into Landstuhl, Germany, where I spent several days. Then I was put on a plane home. I knew the corporation was reimbursing the government for all the medical attention, but I think all those folks went a little above and beyond. Everywhere I went, Marines kept coming up to me and engaging me in conversation, always referring to my Bronze Star. I didn't know how complete strangers knew my face and name, much less any details of what I'd gone through in country, as they kept saying. It was a revelation to me that military personnel have one of the fastest, unofficial communication networks in the free world. I loved the camaraderie of those dangerous men in the Marine Corps and wondered a time or two whether I'd missed my calling. But it was too late in my life to seriously consider a change now. It was time to go back to what I do best. My vacation in Afghanistan, exhilarating as it had been, was over. My office in the Denver corporate complex was waiting for me when I got back to town. Except for a little mustiness, it was exactly the same as when I left it 6 months earlier.